historian of nonviolent direct action named Gene Sharp. He said nonviolent action is a technique by which people who reject passivity and submission and who see struggle as essential can wage their conflict without violence. It's not an attempt to avoid or ignore a conflict. It is one response to the problem of how to act effectively in politics and how to wield your power effectively. And you could read the second one.
Well, nonviolent action, I mean, is a method of a means of combat to confront at certain levels, of perceived injustice or wrong. It does involve matching forces and strategy and considerations. It requires, thoughts about, strategic thoughts about tactics. And it demands of you as participants in direct action a certain level of courage to not yield. Move to another exercise, but we typically might have a larger group stand in a circle, and we were going to ask, like, who has done this, who has done that. And instead of standing up, or if it was a big circle, you step into the circle and everyone can see you. This is a good, intimate crowd, so we'll just work with hands this time.
And what we're hoping to do here is kind of get a sense of the breadth of our experience and our wisdom collectively. So if there's a question that isn't asked that you would like to ask regarding people's history and involvement with direct action, you feel free to ask that.
And a central purpose of this is just to elicit from you things that you have done, that you're familiar with.
One question I might have you ever questioned government policy?
and in your case, Kayla, government policy might be, no, Mom, I don't want to do that. Have you ever done? Okay, there you go. Have you ever written or called an elected official?
We're all a pretty active group, I'm telling you. Have you ever organized a fundraiser? Some active people.
And if you or provided financial or in-kind support to an action campaign.
Have you ever voted?
Have you ever spoken at a rally? Well, a group of people coming together for a common purpose.
Have you ever distributed flyers or put up posters for an issue you agree with?
Has anyone served in the military?
Anyone from a military family? Has anyone taken a peace studies course? A what? Peace study course. Oh, that's interesting. How about...
Has anyone ever felt overwhelmed with the scope of the oppression?
Look at that. Yeah, Mama too, huh?
Yeah. Sometimes that means if you just get tired of the pressure. Yeah.
Have you ever talked with someone you might disagree with and sat down to listen to their concerns?
How about, have you ever listened to your opponent's view? Did you ever hear them?
You have to if you want to talk to them.
Have you ever worked as a professional organizer? That is, getting or get paid for the work you do in organizing.
A little bit here.
Have you ever participated in a sit-down or a lockdown or an action at a place where you might have risked arrest?
For you, that might have been threatened with a timeout.
For me, I would be scared and trapped inside and probably trapped out.
Wow. Now, have you ever run for public office or been a candidate or been actually serving a public office?
How about, have you ever planted a garden?
Oh, yeah. So now for all of you, I bet each of you might have a question along those lines, or maybe one or two could come out.
you ever taken a class on violence?
No, and that's a great question to segue into our next section.
We'll have some other.
I've taken a class with information about violence in the media and how it impacts us.
Yeah, that's a good handout.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we move on? All right. Well, what did we learn from this? We learned a little bit
Have you
about
ever
each
been
other.
arrested
Have you ever been arrested
for
for?
nonviolent action?
Have you ever been arrested? So we've learned a little bit, and this is an exercise you can bring to any of your groups where you're organizing, and help quickly get to know a little bit more about each other and the level of commitment they're already engaged in. Because every one of us is an activist. It's very clear from the way people are raising their hands. And we're an activist on many fronts and with using many techniques of nonviolent direct action. So one fundamental thing is a kind of an understanding of what we're up against. And one of the things we're up against, for instance, is what we might call, you want to do the MIC again?
Yeah, that's just
choose
good.
another?
Well, we know this one.
Okay. Something that Dwight David Eisenhower in his farewell speech called the military-industrial complex. He said, beware of it. It's a kind of the collusion of the military and the corporations and all in our world and have a great deal to change. But what it is indeed, the military-industrial complex, a very big power structure. What we're trying to get at here, if this is something that we want to change and make the world a place more friendly for human and other lives to thrive and grow, what are the things that are holding up this big complex?
You want to give an example to kind of help you see? Like, we have a system, and what keeps the system in place?
One thing might be our agreement or our belief that we should have a system that includes a military that is armed with absolute power to destroy, that calls on our youth to come and offer their lives even in defense of a system, to kill or be killed. One of the things that holds the system up is, well, our cultural belief, our personal and our cultural belief that this is a good thing. What are some other things that might hold up that pillar? Hold up this whole complex here? Fear. Fear. Fear is a strong one, yeah. Fear. Mary?
Well, to me, I have a slightly different reading of those letters than is often necessarily talked about, but to me, there's hardly an industry that isn't tied into the military.
Right.
And so the whole energy complex is part of that I, and that I is part of that M, and the C is the whole thing. And so basically this is a way that we socialize our tax dollars into all these supposedly independent, capitalist, profitable businesses. There's this incredible propping up of these activities that would never be profitable if it weren't for the infusion of tax dollars in. So it's like this huge old boy network collusion. Excuse me, it is a patriarchal thing.
Primarily.
Right.
So flow of resources or the patriarchy?
Both. The patriarchal control of resources through our taxation and insertion of that tax dollars into these very bad actor corporations that wouldn't be profitable without that infusion that happens. They would fall down in a heartbeat if they didn't have that M going into that I.
What about
Corporate welfare.
Corporate welfare.
corporate welfare? What about do our churches play a role in holding up this whole entire
Belief systems.
complex?
Outside of the personal and cultural belief systems, churches.
Institutions such as churches might hold it up. Well, there's a group that acts on issues of concerns of people of different abilities. It's called ACT UP. And they've done a lot of direct action. And they say they have a quote here about non-cooperation. Now, all of these pillars are cooperating to hold up this structure. They're working together to hold up this structure. This ACT UP group says that power, and this is a great deal of power in here, is not derived through violence, but it's often violent in nature. But it's maintained through oppression and the compliance of the majority of the governed. In other words, we agree and support the holding up of this structure. Any significant withdrawal of that agreement, of our obedience, will help dissolve it.
So, were we to put something else? We have one more pillar that you
Yeah,
want to
there's
add?
probably plenty more, but those are a few.
Obedient? I mean,
Well, that falls under the beliefs.
Conformity.
I think just money and greed.
Money, yeah.
taxes.
I mean, that's
Flow of resources and taxes can be the same or slightly different.
Or maybe profit. That they're a profiting group.
Well, greed, I think, is a good word to put there.
Greed? Yeah, greed is holding it up. So just like in defining violence and nonviolence, it takes us a while to get at, to understand what are these, distill it down to what is holding it up. Even in the 16th century, people were thinking along these lines of how do you topple systems of oppression. And there was a fellow, and I have trouble pronouncing his name, N.T. de la Boete. He was a philosopher and a theologian. He says, I do not ask that you put bans on the tyrant to topple him over, but simply that you support him no longer. Then you will behold him like a great colossus whose pedestal has been pulled away, topple of his own weight. So essentially he's saying we and the systems we support, whether with our beliefs or our money or our fear of speaking out, hold it up. And if we begin to pull them away, it'll begin to fall.
So just like earlier, see upside downwards when we were soliciting, definitions of violence. For violent acts, there are actions to confront it and undo it. In a similar fashion, what we would like you to consider for these examples of that are holding up this military-industrial complex, or can you pick one for a minute? Take a minute, take a couple minutes, and look at this yourself. And how could we counter these things? What could we do strategically, long term, sometimes, to undo these supports? So just think about it for a second, unless you just got
Well,
that.
I've been working on this for a while,
Got your
so
light up there. Okay, while others are thinking.
yeah. Well, what we did was we brought a voter initiative in D.C.
Let me ask 1 second.
Yeah.
Antigua, did you have your hand? Did you have your hand
I
up?
did, but go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Well, if you don't mind, Ellen, she had her hand up, but I want to get what you have to say too. So Antigua,
You can wait.
you go ahead. You're on.
Oh, well, I was thinking the Quakers called speaking truth to power, but the emperor has no clothes is the story. Somebody who doesn't have any fear says, oh, he's naked.
And you brought up fear as one of the strong things that holds it up.
So how does that translate, culturally, or out to get enough people saying that?
Well, that's a good question.
So, the point's well taken to point to counter the fear, but if it's just you personally against such a major thing, not that one person can have an effect. Let me come back. Would you give us some thought as to how we can translate that out? Organizing large. And if you'll hang on to that,